Daniel was not supposed to be there that day. The funeral belonged to a man he barely knew, an elderly philanthropist whose name had appeared in newspapers and charity plaques around the city. Daniel had come only because his second job as a grounds assistant paid extra for rainy services, and extra money meant groceries, school shoes, and keeping the lights on. He wore his only black coat, frayed at the cuffs, and stood slightly apart from the well-dressed mourners, feeling invisible in a sea of wealth and whispered condolences. His son Noah stood beside him, solemn and quiet, his small face too familiar with loss for someone so young. As the service ended and people began to drift away, Daniel noticed a woman standing alone near the edge of the gravesite. She was visibly pregnant, her coat stretched tight over her belly, her face pale and strained. No umbrella shielded her from the rain, and her hands trembled as she tried to steady herself. Most people passed her without a glance, absorbed in their own grief or discomfort. Daniel felt that familiar tug in his chest, the same one that had guided him since his wife's death, pushing him to notice pain even when he had little to give. He hesitated only a second. His boots sank into the mud as he walked toward her, Noah following silently. Daniel offered his umbrella and helped her sit on a nearby stone bench. He noticed how exhausted she looked, how her breathing came in shallow waves, and how her eyes darted around as if she were afraid to ask for help. Daniel did not ask questions that would embarrass her. He simply gave what he could. He steadied her, wrapped his coat around her shoulders despite the cold, and signaled for assistance from the funeral staff. When they arrived, Daniel stayed until he was sure she was safe, even though it meant missing his next shift and losing a few precious dollars. The woman thanked him through tears, explaining in broken phrases that she had no family left, that the stress of the funeral and her pregnancy had overwhelmed her. Daniel listened without judgment. He told her she was not alone, even if life made it feel that way. He shared nothing about his own struggles, though his wallet held little more than a few crumpled bills and a picture of his late wife smiling from better days. When the staff escorted the woman away, Daniel watched until she disappeared through the iron gates, never expecting to see her again. That evening, Daniel returned home to his small apartment, the kind where every sound echoes and every corner holds a memory. He made Noah a simple dinner and helped him with homework, pretending not to notice the worry in his son's eyes when the fridge hummed louder than usual. After Noah fell asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, counting bills and calculating how to stretch his paycheck another week. His body ached, his hands were rough, and yet his mind returned to the woman at the funeral. He wondered if she was warm, if she had somewhere safe to rest, and if her child would be born into a kinder world than the one he knew. The knock on the door came just after midnight. It was sharp and insistent, cutting through the silence like a blade. Daniel's heart raced as he opened it, half expecting bad news. Instead, two men in tailored suits stood in the dim hallway, their expressions formal but not unkind. They introduced themselves as legal representatives and asked if Daniel Carter lived there. Confused and wary, Daniel confirmed his name, his mind racing through every possible reason strangers like this would appear at his door. They explained that Daniel had been named in the will of the man whose funeral he had attended that day. At first, Daniel assumed it was a mistake, some clerical error that would be cleared up quickly. He had no connection to the deceased, no shared history, no reason to be included in anything of significance. But the men insisted, their voices steady as they asked him to sit down. What followed felt unreal, like watching someone else's life unfold on a screen. The deceased, it turned out, had been observing quietly from afar. He had attended the funeral under medical supervision, knowing his time was limited, wanting to see who people truly were when no cameras watched. He had noticed Daniel, not for his job or his clothes, but for the way he treated a stranger in need without hesitation. The pregnant woman Daniel had helped was, in fact, carrying the philanthropist's grandchild, abandoned by a family fractured by greed and resentment. Daniel's kindness had ensured her safety during a critical moment, and that single act had been enough. The words that followed barely registered at first. Daniel had inherited $500 million. Not a portion, not a trust with conditions designed to control him, but the majority of the estate, along with the responsibility to oversee charitable foundations dedicated to helping vulnerable families. The room seemed to tilt. Daniel felt dizzy, his breath shallow, his hands shaking as if he might drop the fragile reality forming before him. Shock gave way to disbelief, then fear. Daniel thought of Noah sleeping in the next room, unaware that his world was about to change. He thought of the nights spent choosing between medicine and rent, the quiet prayers whispered into the dark. He asked the men to repeat themselves, convinced he had misunderstood. They did, calmly, patiently, as if delivering life-altering news were an everyday task. When the door finally closed behind them, Daniel sat alone in the dim light of his kitchen. He did not cry. He did not laugh. He simply sat there, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Money, he knew, could solve many problems, but it could also create new ones. He worried about losing himself, about what this would mean for his son, about whether he deserved such a gift when so many others struggled. In the days that followed, Daniel's life transformed at a pace that left him breathless. Lawyers, advisors, and media attention swirled around him, but Daniel remained grounded in the routines that had carried him this far. He still walked Noah to school. He still packed lunches. He still felt uncomfortable in expensive suits and preferred worn jeans and quiet mornings. The story of his inheritance spread quickly, framed as a modern miracle, but Daniel knew the truth was simpler and more profound. It was not about luck. It was about choice. Daniel sought out the pregnant woman he had helped, ensuring she had medical care, housing, and emotional support. He did so privately, without fanfare, understanding that dignity mattered more than headlines. He invested heavily in programs for single parents, grief counseling, and affordable housing, driven by memories of nights when he had felt invisible and desperate. Every decision carried the echo of that rainy afternoon at the cemetery, reminding him how close kindness and catastrophe often stand. Yet wealth did not erase pain. Daniel still missed his wife with an ache that money could not soothe. He still struggled with the fear of raising Noah alone, of making mistakes that could not be undone. But now, when fear crept in, it was met with possibility. He could give his son not just comfort, but purpose, showing him that compassion was the greatest inheritance of all. Years later, Daniel would often return to that cemetery, standing quietly among the stones. He remembered the man who had watched silently, the woman who had needed help, and the moment when he had chosen to act without expectation. He taught Noah that true wealth was measured not by numbers on a page, but by the lives you'd touched when no one was watching.